Hi guys. I knew something had been off for a while. Emily had become distant, almost imperceptibly so at first. It wasn't something I could put my finger on, but it was there. The unspoken coldness in her voice, the way she would glance at her phone in the middle of a conversation, her disinterest when I tried to engage her in the usual banter. Something had changed, and I couldn't tell whether it was the weight of routine or something deeper. We'd been married for 5 years, and in those years, I had always been the one to keep things exciting, or at least that's how I saw it. It was me who kept pushing for weekend getaways, random dinners in new places, spontaneous trips, trying to light that spark again and again. But lately she seemed uninterested, detached, almost like she was living in a separate world. It bothered me more than I cared to admit. Then one evening, it hit me, she wasn't the only one pulling away. I had been slipping into old habits too. The frustration was mounting. I wasn't sure whether it was because I wanted her to notice me, or because I wanted to hurt her for what I perceived as her disinterest. Maybe both. I started noticing her interactions with Charlotte, her best friend. Charlotte had always been part of the picture, a bright, outspoken woman who I'd always been comfortable around, maybe even too comfortable. We'd shared jokes, flirted harmlessly in the past, but Emily had never shown signs of being bothered by it. At least, that was what I thought. But now it felt different. I could feel the tension between Charlotte and Emily, the way Emily's eyes flickered when Charlotte laughed too loudly at one of my jokes or when Charlotte would lean a little too close during a conversation. Emily had been distant enough for me to feel like she wasn't paying attention to me, but now I realized she was paying attention to everything else. In the back of my mind, I knew I wasn't being fair to her. I was starting to feel it, the burn of jealousy creeping in. Maybe she was right to pull away from me. Maybe I had been neglectful. But I didn't want to admit that, and I certainly didn't want to seem weak or vulnerable. So, instead of talking to her, I decided to act out. To make her feel what I was feeling. The first time I tried it, I didn't even think much of it. I let Charlotte know, in the subtlest way, that I was paying attention to her. I teased her a bit more than usual, made a few suggestive comments, even brushed my hand against hers when we were sitting together. Charlotte was laughing and it was working. Emily, who had been quiet for most of the evening, suddenly became much quieter. Her smile was stiff, forced. She didn't look at me the way she used to, didn't touch me in that affectionate way. She just watched. That night, as we all said our goodbyes and Charlotte left, Emily didn't speak a word to me. She just got in the car and stared out of the window, her face unreadable. When we got home, she went straight to the bedroom without a word. I followed her, expecting a fight, something to break the silence, but instead, she just turned her back to me and pulled the covers up to her chin. For the first time in a long time, I felt completely alone in my own house. But the next few days were even worse. Emily didn't confront me. She didn't lash out. She simply withdrew further. It was as if she had become a stranger, living in the same house but not participating in the life we had built. I would catch her staring at her phone, texting someone, maybe Charlotte, and whenever I asked her about her day, she would give vague, non-committal answers. Something about the air between us felt suffocating, and I found myself doing the same thing I always did when I felt cornered. Pushing for more, seeking more attention. I started acting out more, just to see if it would have the same effect. I made plans with Charlotte without Emily, knowing it would make her uncomfortable. I would catch Charlotte's eye across the room and smile just a little too warmly. It didn't even feel like flirting anymore. It felt like a game, a power struggle between me and Emily, and I was determined to win. Emily, though, seemed unfazed. She didn't get angry. She didn't cry. She just watched. Her eyes followed every move, but there was nothing in them. No fire. No jealousy. Just nothing. It was maddening. One evening, as we sat in the living room, Charlotte was over. I made a deliberate point to laugh a little too hard at her jokes, to comment on how nice her dress looked, to reach across her for a glass of wine, all things I knew would get under Emily's skin. She wasn't looking at us, but I knew she could feel it. Charlotte was laughing along with me, feeding into it, enjoying the game we were playing. It was supposed to make Emily jealous, but it didn't. She just sat there, her expression a little vacant. She stood up suddenly, excused herself, and went upstairs. That was the moment I realized I'd crossed a line. I could feel my chest tightening as she left, and for the first time in days, I felt a flicker of something real, guilt. I excused myself from Charlotte, who was still chatting away, oblivious to the emotional storm brewing inside me, and followed Emily upstairs. She was sitting at the edge of the bed, her head buried in her hands. I said softly, unsure of what to say next. She didn't respond. Are you? I started, but the words felt weak, like they weren't enough to bridge the gap between us. Do you enjoy this? She asked without looking at me, her voice hollow. Do you enjoy watching me fall apart? Because that's what's happening, James. I'm falling apart, and you're just watching. I felt the weight of her words hit me hard, like a slap across the face. My mind raced, but I couldn't find the right response. I had wanted her to feel jealousy, to feel something, anything, but I had never expected her to break like this. I'm sorry, I muttered, though the words felt inadequate. I didn't mean to hurt you. She finally looked up, and for the first time in what felt like forever, her eyes met mine. But there was no love in them anymore. There was only disappointment. You think I don't see what you're doing? She asked, her voice trembling. I know you, James. I know you're trying to make me jealous. I know you're pushing me away because you're angry or scared or whatever it is you think you're feeling, but I don't care anymore. I don't. Her words hit me like a cold wave. It was as if she had finally let go, her grip on our relationship slipping away entirely. Emily, I said, trying to step closer, but she held up her hand to stop me. Oh, don't come near me. I'm done, she whispered, her voice breaking. I'm done. That night, as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had done something irreversible. I had tried to make her jealous, to get a reaction, and instead, I had driven her away completely. I thought I was trying to get her back, but in the end, I only pushed her further into the distance. I had wanted her to notice me, to care again. Instead, I had pushed her so far that she no longer seemed to care at all. I never imagined it would go this far. Emily had already told me she was done, but it wasn't just the end of our relationship that stung. No, it was the overwhelming sense of betrayal that gnawed at me, the realization that everything I had known, everything I had fought for, had been a lie. And it wasn't just Emily who had betrayed me. No, there was something much worse, something far more personal, that would break me entirely. It happened a few days after that night, the night she told me she was done. I was still reeling from her words, the finality of it all. My mind kept running in circles. What had gone wrong? How could I have let this happen? It was the kind of regret that twisted in your gut and wouldn't let go. But as much as I wanted to understand, as much as I wanted to find some way to fix things, part of me didn't know if I wanted to fix things at all anymore. Part of me was just so damn angry. I was scrolling through my phone, trying to distract myself from the mess that was my life. The silence in the house felt suffocating. Emily wasn't even coming home some nights. She told me she was staying with a friend, but that didn't stop the gnawing feeling that something was wrong. I should have trusted my gut, but I didn't. I kept thinking about her words, how she said she was done with me. But then one evening as I was checking my inbox, something caught my eye. An email from an anonymous source. There was no subject line, just a video file attached. My heart skipped a beat, a cold shiver running down my spine. I shouldn't have opened it, but I did. I hit play, and what I saw made the world around me go still. The video was shaky at first, and for a moment, I couldn't understand what was happening. It was dark, almost too dark to make out the figures, but then I recognized the voices. Emily's voice. David's voice. My brother. I watched in horror as the scene unfolded. There was no denying it. Emily and David were in a hotel room. I could see them both now, Emily, her face flushed, her hair disheveled, and David, his hands on her, too intimate, too familiar. They were kissing, tangled in each other's arms. And then, it became more graphic. They were in bed together, their movements slow and deliberate. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. It was like a train wreck, and I was powerless to stop it. Everything I had known, everything I had thought about my brother and my wife, came crashing down in an instant. The betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was physical, visceral, and it was happening right under my nose. I sat there, frozen, staring at the screen for what felt like hours. My head was spinning, my heart pounding in my chest. I had to make sense of this. I had to figure out how to process what I was seeing. But I couldn't. It didn't feel real. David and Emily? Together? It was something I never even considered, let alone imagined. As the video played, I could hear their voices again. Emily's laugh, the same laugh I'd heard 1,000 times in our home. But now, it felt like a mockery, like a cruel joke. David's words came next, muffled but clear enough. "I've wanted this for so long," he said, his voice low and filled with something I couldn't identify. Emily responded, breathless, her voice shaky. "I never thought I'd do this, but I can't help it." I felt sick. My brother, the person I had grown up with, the one I had trusted, had been sleeping with my wife behind my back. I had to confront him. I had to know the truth. But even as the thoughts raced through my mind, I knew I couldn't just go to him. I couldn't just ask him. No, this was far too personal, too much for any confrontation. He had done this with my wife, my own flesh and blood. The rage inside me was unbearable. The anger I felt was a physical weight pressing down on my chest. I couldn't stand the idea of them thinking they could get away with this. I needed to expose them. I needed the world to see them for what they really were. It wasn't about revenge, not entirely. It was about taking back control, about making them feel the same pain I felt. But more than that, it was about ending this. About erasing them from my life forever. I stared at the video again, watched as their bodies intertwined, and something inside me snapped. I picked up my phone. I didn't care who saw it. I didn't care what happened after this. The world would know what my brother and my wife had done. I wasn't going to let them get away with it. I spent the next hour deliberating, my hands shaking as I debated whether I should post the video or just send it to them directly. But no, they deserved worse than just a private confrontation. I was going to destroy them. I uploaded the video to a popular site, anonymous, of course. I didn't want anyone to trace it back to me. I wanted them to feel the weight of what they had done, the way they had torn apart everything I thought was sacred. Once the video was live, I stared at the screen. No, I had done it. There was no turning back. The video would spread like wildfire, and soon, everyone would know the truth. They would see Emily, my beautiful, perfect wife, betraying me with my own brother. I wanted to feel some satisfaction, but all I felt was an empty pit in my stomach. What had I done? I left the house then. I couldn't be there when the notifications started rolling in. I couldn't stay in that place where everything I had worked for, everything I thought I had built, was being destroyed in real time. I drove aimlessly, my hands gripping the wheel too tight, my thoughts racing. What would Emily do when she saw it? What would David say when he realized it was out there for everyone to see? Would they even care? I had to admit it. I wasn't just angry. I wasn't just hurt. I was ashamed. I had let this go on for too long, let them walk all over me. And now I had taken the power back, or so I thought. The reality, however, was much darker than I expected. As I sat in my car, my phone buzzed. I looked at it and saw the first notification. Someone had already commented on the video. My heart skipped a beat. I opened the app and scrolled through the comments. The first few were full of shock, disbelief. But as the minutes passed, more comments began flooding in. Some were supportive, some were mocking. People speculated, people insulted Emily and David. And then one comment stood out. "You sure this is your brother? I've heard rumors about James and Emily before. Looks like there's more to the story than you're letting on." I stared at the comment, frozen. What did they mean? Had people suspected something was wrong between us all along? Was this video just the final piece of the puzzle, or was there more that I hadn't seen? The thought made my blood run cold. I needed to know. But for the first time since I clicked upload, I was starting to doubt everything I had done. What was I really trying to achieve? Revenge? Justice? Or was this about something darker, a way to tear down everything I once held dear? The question lingered in my mind, but I didn't have an answer. And with that uncertainty came a new kind of dread, the kind that gnaws at you long after the damage is done. And it was just beginning. The video had already made its rounds, its reach expanding far beyond what I could have imagined. By the time I woke up the next morning, the flood of notifications had already begun. Messages from friends, family, even colleagues, all flooding my phone. I couldn't bring myself to check them. I didn't need to. I already knew what they were saying. The video had exposed everything, laid bare the deepest betrayal, and I was left standing in the ruins of my life. I wasn't proud of what I'd done, but I couldn't deny the dark satisfaction it brought me. The power of it, the destruction I had unleashed, was almost intoxicating. Seeing Emily and David exposed like that, seeing the shame on their faces as the world watched their dirty secret unfold, gave me a fleeting sense of justice. But that feeling was short-lived. The truth was, I hadn't really known what I was doing. At first, it was all about revenge. But now it felt like I had stepped into a new phase of this nightmare. Something deeper, something more final. My mind kept returning to one simple fact. Emily was gone. She was already done with me, but I was still stuck here, wallowing in the mess of our relationship. The damage had been done, and there was no going back. I couldn't stay in the same house with her. I couldn't pretend that everything would just magically fix itself. And frankly, I didn't want to. I was done. Done with the lies, done with the deceit, done with the charade. I wasn't going to let this drag on any longer. It was time to finalize this. Time to end it all. I'd always been the one to handle the finances in our relationship, the one to make sure the bills were paid and that we were comfortable. Emily never really worried about money. She trusted me to take care of it, and for the most part, I had. But as the realization hit me that everything I'd thought I knew about her, about us, had been a lie, I decided it was time to take control of everything. I had to make sure there was no way for her to escape the consequences of her actions. That night, after a sleepless few hours, I decided it. I was going to freeze all of our joint accounts. Cut her off financially. Let her see what it felt like to lose everything. It wasn't just about the money, though. It was about power. It was about stripping her of any safety net, any cushion, and leaving her to face the reality of her choices. I called the bank the following morning. I didn't waste any time. My heart raced as I went through the motions, feeling the finality of it all. I transferred all our joint funds to a separate account and froze everything else. No more access. No more support. When I was done, I sat there for a long time, staring at the screen of my phone, wondering how she'd react. How would Emily feel when she realized she had nothing left? How would David respond when he realized I wasn't just going to let this go? That evening, I decided to confront her, not just about the affair, but about everything. Emily had been coming home less and less, staying at friends' houses, though I knew where she was really going. It was clear that she had already checked out of our marriage, but I wasn't done yet. I waited for her to come home, pacing in the living room, the weight of the situation pressing down on me. When the door opened, she stepped in, her eyes immediately finding mine. Her expression was tired, distant. She hadn't even bothered to look at me the way she used to. It was as if she had already emotionally checked out of the house long before I'd ever thought to take action. "James," she said, her voice cold but oddly calm. "We need to talk." I didn't say anything at first. I just stood there, watching her, trying to figure out if she was even going to pretend like nothing had happened. But she didn't. She didn't apologize. She didn't beg for forgiveness. She just stood there, waiting for me to speak. I couldn't hold back anymore. The words were already on the tip of my tongue, and this time, I didn't care if they hurt. "I'm divorcing you," I said flatly. The words tasted bitter, but they were true. This was it. The end. Emily didn't flinch. She didn't break down in front of me like I thought she might. Instead, she sighed, running a hand through her hair, and then sat down on the couch, as though the news had barely registered. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice filled with an odd mixture of resignation and indifference. "Of course I'm sure," I said, walking towards the kitchen, trying to steady my breath. "What do you expect? After everything?" She didn't respond. She just sat there, the silence stretching out between us. And then, without warning, I dropped the bomb. "I've frozen our accounts," I said, not looking at her. "You have no access to anything anymore. No money, No savings, nothing. Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with shock. But even then, she didn't seem angry. She seemed surprised, almost impressed. You really did it, didn't you? I nodded, a cold smile creeping across my face. You don't get to walk away from this scot-free, Emily. Not after everything you've done. Her eyes flickered with a mix of emotions. There was a brief flash of anger. She had every right to be angry, I knew that, but there was something else in her expression too. Not the kind I had expected, but the kind that made me wonder if she hadn't been prepared for this moment, the finality of it all. I don't even know who you are anymore, she said softly, her voice almost a whisper. I thought I knew you. But this isn't you, James. This is heady. This is spiteful. Her words hit me, but only for a moment. I had crossed a line, but at this point, I didn't care. I wanted her to feel the weight of her betrayal. I wanted her to see that I was no longer the man she thought she could manipulate. I'm not the man you used to know, Emily, I said. You killed that guy a long time ago. I'm done with you. She stared at me for a long moment, and then, with a heavy sigh, she stood up. For a second, I thought she might cry, but no tears came. She simply turned away, grabbing her things, heading toward the door. Fine, she said, her voice distant. If this is how you want it. I'm done too. I'll be out tomorrow. I watched her leave, the door closing softly behind her. The silence that followed was deafening, but it wasn't the silence of mourning. It was the silence of a chapter being closed, a new one beginning. But as I sat there, looking around the empty house, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had lost something more than just Emily. I had lost the last piece of the life I thought I had, the life I had worked so hard to build. The revenge felt hollow, like an empty victory. There was no satisfaction in it, no joy, just an aching emptiness. And yet, I couldn't stop. I had done what I needed to do. The accounts were frozen, the divorce papers would soon be filed, and Emily would have to face the consequences of her actions. She might have thought I was petty, spiteful, but I didn't care anymore. I was done. But even as the reality of it all sank in, something inside me couldn't help but wonder, had I gone too far? Had I really done this for the right reasons? Or was this just my way of punishing myself for all the mistakes I had made? The question haunted me, but I didn't have an answer. The divorce papers had been filed, and Emily was gone, or at least, physically gone. She had taken her things and moved out, leaving nothing behind but an empty space that felt colder by the day. The silence in the house was unbearable, but at the same time, it was a relief. It was over. Or at least, that's what I kept telling myself. But there was something I hadn't told her yet. Something I'd been holding on to, something that had been eating away at me since the moment I decided to exact my revenge. I had promised myself I wouldn't stoop to that level, that I wouldn't let my emotions drive me into another act of betrayal. But looking back, I realize I'd crossed that line long before I even uploaded the video of Emily and David. It wasn't just the affair between them that hurt me, it was everything that came after. The way Emily had walked away without even a second thought, as if I meant nothing to her. But there was one thing she didn't know, one thing I knew would shatter everything she thought she understood about our marriage. Charlotte, her best friend. I had slept with her. I had never intended for it to happen. At least, I hadn't planned it that way. It wasn't a revenge affair like Emily's betrayal with David. It started with something simple. A few late-night texts. Charlotte always seemed to know when something was wrong between me and Emily. She could tell when I was upset, when things were falling apart. It was almost as if she sensed my pain, as if she could read me in ways Emily never could anymore. She was always there, offering support, comforting me when things with Emily had become unbearable. And slowly, over time, I found myself looking forward to those texts, those phone calls, the little moments of attention. And then one night it happened. I had gone to Charlotte's apartment after a particularly tense argument with Emily. I needed space. I needed to get out of the house. Charlotte had invited me over for a drink, to talk. I wasn't expecting anything more than a conversation. But as the night went on, the lines between friendship and something more blurred. We'd shared too many drinks, and the tension between us, the unspoken attraction that had always been there, finally broke. We kissed. I remember how it felt, like a fire had been ignited in me, a fire that I hadn't felt in a long time. Maybe it was the alcohol. Maybe it was the vulnerability. But I didn't pull away. I didn't stop. One thing led to another, and before I knew it, I was in her bed. In that moment, there was nothing else. No guilt, no shame, just the overwhelming feeling of release. It was like waking up from a bad dream, an escape from everything that had gone wrong. The next morning, though, the reality of it hit me hard. I had crossed a line I never thought I would. And Charlotte? She acted like it was just another night. She didn't apologize, didn't show any signs of regret. I felt sick to my stomach, but I couldn't deny that part of me was relieved. I didn't tell Emily about it, of course. She was already checked out, emotionally distant, and I knew that would be the last straw for her. But deep down, I also knew that I had crossed over to the same side as her. I had betrayed her, just like she had betrayed me. But the difference was, I wasn't flaunting it. I wasn't hiding it either. I was just living with it. Until now. I hadn't seen Charlotte since that night, and I hadn't spoken to her about it. But after the divorce papers were filed, after Emily had left and everything had started to settle down, something inside me cracked. I needed her to know. I needed her to feel what I felt. I needed to show her that I wasn't just the victim here. So I called her. "Charlotte," I said when she answered, my voice tight. "We need to talk." There was a moment of silence before she spoke. "Is everything okay, James?" "Everything's fine," I replied, my words cold. "But we need to talk about something. Something important." She hesitated, then agreed to meet me at a cafe a few hours later. I wasn't sure what I expected from her, but I knew I needed to confront her. I needed to make sure she understood the weight of what I had done, and, in a strange way, what she had done to me. When I saw her walk into the cafe, I almost didn't recognize her. She looked so different, less like the friend I had confided in for years and more like a stranger. The same air of confidence she'd always carried, but now, it felt more distant, more rehearsed. She sat down across from me, and we exchanged a few awkward pleasantries before I cut through the small talk. "I slept with you, Charlotte," I said, my words heavy with bitterness. Her eyes flickered with surprise, but she didn't flinch. "I know," she said softly. "Do you?" I shot back, leaning in. "Do you know what that did to me? Do you know how it felt to betray my wife with my own brother, and then to make the same mistake with you? With my wife's best friend?" There was no defensiveness in her eyes. No apology either. Just that same cool, distant look. "I know what I did, James," she said. "But we're both adults. We both made choices. What happened between us, it didn't mean anything. It was just a moment." "Just a moment?" I scoffed, the anger rising in my chest. "You think that's all this was? You think I don't know what you were doing? You've been watching me fall apart for months, and then you took advantage of that. You were there to pick up the pieces, weren't you?" She didn't argue. She didn't try to justify anything. She just sat there, her eyes locked on mine, waiting for me to continue. "I never meant for it to go this far," I said, my voice quieter now. "But Emily, she was already gone. She was already with David. I wanted to hurt her, Charlotte. I wanted her to feel what I felt. But the problem is, I'm not just angry at her anymore. I'm angry at you. You knew better. You knew what I was going through, and you let me fall into that trap. You didn't stop me." Charlotte didn't seem surprised by my words. She just nodded, her lips tight. "I didn't ask you to sleep with me," she said, her tone sharp. "I didn't manipulate you. I didn't make you do anything. You were the one who came to me. You were the one who crossed the line." The words stung, but she was right. I had done this. I had made the choice. And now, here I was, trying to blame everyone else for my mistakes. I sat back, defeated. My mind was a whirlwind of emotions. I had betrayed Emily, yes, but in the process, I had betrayed myself. This wasn't about Charlotte. It wasn't about Emily or David either. It was about me. And I had to accept that. Charlotte reached across the table and placed a hand on mine, her touch surprisingly gentle. "You're angry, James. I get it. But don't let it destroy you. You have to let go of this anger before it consumes you." I pulled my hand away, standing up abruptly. I don't need your advice, Charlotte. I need you to understand what this has done to me. To us. And to her. I walked away without another word, my heart heavy with the weight of everything I had lost. The anger didn't feel like enough anymore. It never had. The day the video went viral was the day I lost any hope of moving on. At first, the satisfaction of watching Emily and David squirm, their secrets laid bare for the world to see, was enough to fill me with a sense of bitter justice. But as the days passed, I realized that the destruction I'd set in motion had a life of its own. It wasn't just a petty revenge anymore. It was a full-scale wrecking ball crashing through everything in its path, leaving nothing but rubble behind. The video spread like wildfire. It had been carefully crafted, sharp, unforgiving. Emily and David never saw it coming. The affair between them had already been a stain on their reputations, but the footage, so raw and humiliating, made sure that stain would never fade. The most damning part wasn't the affair itself, it was the way they acted, the way they believed they could get away with it, hiding behind lies and half-truths. They thought no one would ever find out, that they could go on with their lives untouched. I had to make sure they were wrong. It started with the people who mattered most to them. Emily's colleagues. David's friends. They were the first to see the video, and soon enough, they began whispering behind their backs. The text messages, the screenshots, the calls from outraged coworkers, it was all happening so fast I couldn't keep up. The first person to reach out to me was Charlotte, of all people. She had heard the buzz, the rumors, the whispers. She knew what I had done, but now she was seeing the real-world consequences. "You have to stop this, James," she said, her voice frantic when I picked up the phone. "This is getting out of control. You're going to ruin them. You think I don't know that?" I replied coldly. "They deserve it. After everything they've done, they deserve worse. I know you're angry, but this is too much. Please, think about what you're doing." I could hear the desperation in her voice, but I didn't care. There was no stopping it now. Emily had already made her choice, and so had I. There was no going back. As the hours passed, the fallout intensified. Emily's workplace was the first to take action. She had worked at a prestigious firm, a job she had built her entire career around. That same night, she received a call from her boss. I could practically hear the humiliation in her voice when she told me about it. She had been fired. Just like that. No second chances. No, we'll work through this. It was done. Her professional reputation had been shattered in an instant, all because of her betrayal. But that wasn't the worst of it. The next day, David's life fell apart too. He was a respected academic, a professor at a university I had once admired. I had never told Emily that David had been the one who introduced me to the concept of respectable success, how to climb the ladder, how to network, how to make it in the world. David had always been the model of achievement, the one I looked up to when I was younger. He had everything I thought I wanted: career, status, respect. Now, all of it was slipping through his fingers. The video, of course, didn't just stay within our small circle. It leaked out to the university. It spread through every department, every classroom. Students shared it on their phones, faculty members watched it during meetings. The public humiliation was swift. Within 48 hours, David was suspended from his position, pending an investigation. His reputation, just like Emily's, was in tatters. But what truly drove the final nail into their coffins were their families. Both Emily and David came from old, well-respected families, ones that prided themselves on their image and standing. Emily's parents, who had always adored me, I was the son they never had, the perfect husband for their daughter, found out about the affair when a family friend called them. The video had been shared among their social circle, and suddenly, the tight-knit community they had built around themselves began to unravel. Emily's mother, once so warm and welcoming, called her in tears. "How could you do this, Emily?" she asked, her voice breaking. "How could you betray him like this? How could you ruin everything?" Her father, ever the stoic one, simply hung up on her. I can still hear the cold silence that followed. David's family wasn't any better. His father, an old-school businessman who had built his empire with ruthless precision, couldn't contain his fury. David had always been the golden child, the one who would carry on the family name and legacy. Now he was a disgrace. I remember the moment when David tried to call me. He had already been suspended from his job, his academic career hanging in the balance. He had tried to spin the whole affair as a mistake, a one-time lapse in judgment. But there was no fixing it now. The public knew. His colleagues knew. His family knew. And they all hated him for it. "James, please," he begged, his voice low and filled with panic. "You have to take the video down. You have to fix this. It's going too far. My career is over." I didn't respond right away. I just listened to him, letting his desperation sink in. "You should have thought of that before you decided to fuck my wife, David," I said finally, my voice devoid of any sympathy. "You should have thought about the consequences before you betrayed me like that." He didn't say anything for a long time. I could hear him breathing heavily, his frustration building. But I didn't care. I couldn't care. Not after everything. "You're going to destroy everything," he said quietly, his voice shaking. "Our families, our reputations. You're going to ruin us." "That's the point," I replied, and I hung up. The following days were a blur. I didn't keep track of everything. The phone calls, the emails, the texts, but I could feel the ripple effects everywhere I went. People looked at me differently now. Some with pity, some with quiet admiration. I knew they were talking about me, whispering behind my back. They all thought they knew what was going on, but they didn't. They had no idea how deep the betrayal had gone. They didn't know what it was like to have everything ripped from you, to be forced to watch the people you loved turn their backs on you, to be mocked and lied to. They didn't understand what I had done to get my revenge. Emily called me once, maybe 2 days after her firing. She begged me to take the video down. She promised she would fix everything, that she would make it right. But I didn't respond. I couldn't. The person I once knew, the woman I thought I loved, was gone. She had destroyed me, and now she was paying the price. I wasn't sure if I felt satisfaction anymore. I didn't feel any of the triumph I thought I would. It was empty. The destruction, the fallout, it all felt meaningless. Emily and David had lost everything. But I had lost something too. I had lost the man I once was, the person I thought I could be. And no amount of revenge was ever going to bring him back. I sat alone in my apartment that night, scrolling through my phone, watching as their reputations continued to crumble. Emily's social media accounts were filled with hate, insults from former friends, coworkers. David's academic career was over. He would never teach again. And in the silence that followed, I realized one thing. Sometimes, the hardest part of revenge isn't the pain you cause others. It's the emptiness that fills you once it's done. Goodbye.